Let's drop this front subframe one more time, fix up a couple of the problem areas, we'll get everything reinstalled, and get it back up in place. Here we go again. We're going to drop the front subframe now that I have a better way of fixing the mount for the front sway bar. So we're going to start removing things right away. And the good news is just did this, so it's easy to do it again. We're removing the lower control arm here, of course. And then we're going to drop this front subframe down again. I got a couple tips I think I can help you guys out with if you're ever doing this by yourself or doing this on your own. That could be useful. And of course, there are the two main nuts holding it in place, and then the two larger bolts in the back. So we're going to remove all those. And I will say, when I did this last time, I totally dropped down my steering column, and I didn't have to really actually do that. So this can help for removing and, of course, installing when you're, kind of disconnecting your steering rack. Is if you go underneath the steering column, we're in the car here, and you go underneath the steering column, you can see I have a vice grip on this one clamp that basically lets you extend this rod. You can make it longer or shorter where it connects to the actual, steering column. So basically, if I needed it to be able to slide in and out at all, I just had that vice grip on it, and that kind of helped me out there. So hopefully that tip will help you if you are trying to remove your front subframe. So of course I cleared things out of the way, lifted up the subframe, got it back on the ground so it's easier to work on. And then thank you to the person who commented about using this rivet nut tool. $50 and a trip to Harbor Freight later. I have a good kind of fix for this stripped out, broken out area here where the front sway bar connects. And this is my first time using a riv nut gun thing, or whatever they call it. But it actually went really easy. But of course, first you need to make it fit in the hole. It wasn't quite the right size. So there's this 11 millimeter or I think 7/16 size here. Something that was close to the right size drill bit. I had to drill this out just a little bit bigger, which is good. I'd rather have to drill it out than have it be too big, of course. So I drilled it out just a little bit, gave it a quick test fit. And it was the right size, so that was good. So here's this tool that I never used before, but it seemed to work just fine on my first time. So you just screw that riv nut on there, you put it in the hole, and then you squeeze the handles, and then it should kind of form around the inner part, in this case, of that subframe, and then we just unscrew it. And now we have threads in place. So this is pretty awesome. So this is a cool fix for this. This prevents me from having to fish through some bolt and then put a nut on the other side and do all that kind of screwing around, especially considering this is one of the hardest nuts or bolts, I should say, to get to when it comes to this front sway bar, when it's in the car, of course. Right now it's easy to get to. So tested it out, made sure a bolt went in there fine after I put that rivet nut in place, and we should be good to go. So that was super awesome to have that sorted out. Here's the bracket I was telling you about that was kicking my butt in the last one. I know I didn't show it very much, but this motor mount bracket, of course, I'm gonna bolt this up in place as well right away. And I got all these bolts with a little bit of anti-seize on the threads ready to go. So go ahead. Of course, there's 3 bolts here holding it in place. So we get that in and then tighten those up. And talking about stuff that's hard to get to again, this one bolt right here is the one that kicked my butt before. When the subframe's in the car, it's really tough to get to that bolt right there. It's possible, but it's tough. The other 2 aren't quite as bad to get to, but there you go. That's what it looks like. Now we're going to move on to the front sway bar. Of course, this is not easy to access at all either. I don't think I would be able to get it in, or out without dropping this front subframe. I'm really not sure, but I don't think you could sneak this thing out really unless you at least lowered this front subframe down. I'm probably going to learn actually very soon whether or not that's possible, because I do have brand new bushings for this front subframe that I want to put in, but they're not here yet. So in the next video, hopefully you guys will find out whether or not I have to drop the front subframe all the way down to change those, or if I can kind of just work around it a little bit to change those bushings that hold the front sway bar down. But for now, I just want to make sure everything is going to work, like it should. And hopefully, again, I don't have to drop everything down again next time I work on this. If I do, not that big of a deal, but whatever. Now this power steering line here, we're going to put this in place as well. This one goes more towards the front of the steering rack. So we're going to get that in place. It's got the 2 crush washers, if you will, on each side of it. So we're going to make sure we have those washers on there so it doesn't leak. Don't remember the proper name for that again, but whatever those are that you see on a lot of power steering type stuff, or even your turbo oil feed lines have those same kind of crush washers in there. There is a hole where this lines up, so you can't really hardly screw up where you put this power steering line in place. It has to kind of line up this one spot and go in. So of course we got that lined up where that part protrudes and it's sticking in. This is a 22 millimeter bolt here. It was actually really hard to get a wrench in there at all, so I switched over to a socket. Luckily, I could just lift my sway bar up out of the way and used a ratchet and a socket and went ahead and tightened that bolt up. Further down the way is this line and this bracket that holds it in place as well. I had to clean this up and get a bunch of stuff off there to kind of make it fit and get this bolt even in place here. But cleaned everything up, got that bolt in place and bolted it onto that bracket that's just above our steering rack. And there you go. That's what everything looks like before we go to reinstall it. Our front subframe looking a little more complicated, a little more things added to it. Sway bars in place, power steering lines are in place. We should be pretty good to go. I still might coat it with something. That was another good comment I got from people, was potentially wanting to coat it stuff so it doesn't rust. So I might throw some stuff on there to try to make sure it doesn't get too rusty. One final piece of the puzzle here that I get to show now is this guard. Basically, the larger piece is kind of bolted on from inside the car, and then this smaller piece will just kind of sit on the steering rack. It does say LHD and RHD on this smaller piece, and I think that means it might be able to be used for right-hand drive or left-hand drive EVOs, depending on the way you put it in place. I'm not really sure. I think I ended up having the LHD left-hand drive part facing towards the front of the car, and I think that's the proper way. But of course, it's pretty easy to lift this up and spin it on there, so it's not too tricky to play with. But you can see that it says LHD or left-hand drive on the inner part of this as well. So this, of course, just kind of protects where that piece mounts, keep it from getting rusty and getting corroded, any of that stuff. So we do want to put that back in place. So here we go again. We're going to raise up the car. We're going to utilize these stands that I have, and we're going to set this whole front subframe on those stands again. Between that and the hoist, it makes it really nice. Someone that had commented to me how they did this on the ground once and how crappy it was. And I can only imagine, you know, putting in a front subframe or removing when your car's on the ground. It's got to suck. So I am super blessed to have access to a hoist and these stands. It just made this actually pretty easy. I can obviously just slide things around to line it up, move things, shift things over. I can bring it up with those stands that hold it up in place. I can lower the car if I need to lower the car. So it's just pretty nice having the right tools to make all this go pretty easy. But of course, the steering stuff we just talked about. So you're gonna see this big hole here, of course, and we don't want that. You probably won't even have to remove this piece, honestly, if you're just dropping your front subframe. But now you can see what it looks like when it's in place. But you know, working with this car that had it removed, I just had to take it out of the silver car and put it in place. So now we can raise everything up little by little, again, using what I have. Line up that steering column part where the steering connection goes through and connects to that steering rack. Lift everything up on both sides. As I mentioned in my prior video, just want to get some bolts started, especially those nuts. Actually, it's good to get those nuts started just a little bit. Once you have it up high enough, we'll get the nuts started and on either side. And basically, once I had both of those nuts started, I could get it up in place and then tighten up my steering column to that steering rack. And again, back on the back side, you guys just saw me do this if you watched my last video, but I recommend, again, putting that little bolt in place towards the frame side of the car here. That little one kind of can make things line up better for those control arm ones and those big long bolts that go through the rear part of those control arms. Similar with those control arms, I found that sliding them in, it can be a bit tricky to sliding in that rear part, but if you play around with it a little bit, you should be able to get it. You might have to kind of tilt those bushings. Those bushings should obviously be movable, so you can adjust the angle of those bushings a little bit to kind of slide them in place as well. But we're sliding in the passenger side front control arm, getting that set in and tightened up. And finally, once we have all those bolts kind of started, we're just going to walk around, make sure we tighten them all up. So there we go, lowering the car back down. We'll take a look. As you can see under the hood now, it looks like a more complete front subframe. I'm glad this ended up working out okay. I was kind of nervous that this front subframe that I just had replaced, as I mentioned, this front subframe is brand new OEM, less than 3 years old. And other than having to fix that one part where the sway bar connects. Other than that, it's pretty much really good shape and good to go. So you may have noticed that I kind of skipped over doing stuff on the driver's side of the car with this lower control arm. This is a brand new lower control arm that came with the car, but unfortunately I still need to change out the ball joint. It is a brand new ball joint, but I do have the Whiteline roll center kit with this one, and the ball joints are unique to that kit to adjust the roll center of your car. So I'm going to pop out this brand new ball joint, and I figured I would show you guys doing that as well. I got a full how-to video on doing this, but I realized there's certain things I could have explained a little better in that video. So this is kind of a quick and dirty version of that, of how to do it. So maybe you guys will find something helpful with this too. And plus, if you're still watching right now, you're just a hardcore boosted films enthusiast anyway. So of course we're taking off that protective boot first, and then we're going to utilize snap ring pliers here to get this OEM snap ring out of place. So you got to use something to spread this apart, and then I used a screwdriver just to kind of pry it up as I went along, just so we can get that snap ring out of the way. You can do this on the car. If you have a certain tool, you can do it right on the car. Sometimes you might want to do it right on the car. That's fine. I have access to a press, which is also the way I showed it in my other video. But since I do have access to a press, I'm just going to pull out this lower control arm. Obviously, there's not a lot holding it in place anyway. I don't have all my stuff in the front end in place, so it wasn't too hard to just pull out this lower control arm. And here you can see with the lower control arm out of place, you can see this OEM ball joint, this new one in place. The main idea here when you're pressing this out is you want something big enough to fit around the outer edge so it can sit on it. Like this is sitting, but then also it has to have a hole inside big enough, you know, for that ball joint to push and fall into. So hopefully that makes sense. That's half the battle with this job, is just finding the right little piece. So I'm not sure. I can't tell you for sure which ball joint kit you buy. They do sell kits that, you know, make these pieces specifically for different ball joints, because a lot of ball joints are different sizes. But that's half the battle here. And then same thing with pressing this new one out. It's just going to be finding, you know, the right size. I cut to after I pushed the old one out just so you could see visually for sure, like this, that's what you need. You need something that can push through, you know, of course, that's small enough to push through and fit through this lower control arm, but yet large enough to kind of fit over the edge of the OEM ball joint. So probably over explaining things there, but hopefully you guys understand that's all you're really doing is you're just pushing this old thing out. So while you're pushing it out, make sure you have something that can push enough on whatever you want to get pushed out, while also not being, you know, too large to catch on the outer edge of whatever you're pushing it out of. And you also might be able to just take this to someone that has a press and has done this before and say, hey, how much will you charge me for this? And just be like, hey, can you press in these new ball joints for me? And they might just go ahead and do it for you. But so there we go. We pressed the old one out. What I did notice too is it did seem like this brand new OEM one had kind of this lip, this aluminum lip around the bottom part of the control arm was kind of formed, I think, to that ball joint. So when you're pressing it out, you're actually making that lip not be a lip anymore, if you will, at least not a bended over lip. And sometimes that can actually kind of crack, or it can break a little bit of that off, and that's fine and that's normal. But of course that's only if it's a part that's not important to holding the whole ball joint in place. But if it's just a little bit of that edging or that lip I referred to earlier that kind of happened when you pushed it out, then it's nothing to worry about. So of course I did do both sides. I didn't film doing the other side, and that one seemed to go a little bit smoother, of course. But pressing this one in initially, it did, you know, you want to watch when you press these in because you want to make sure that they're going in straight and true. Of course, for whatever reason, this one didn't seem like it was going in straight and true initially. So I pounded it, or pressed it back out, and then gave it a second attempt here, where it again kind of seemed to be a little bit off. So in that case where if it does seem like one side is going in unevenly, obviously the side in this case that's a bit higher, you can put more pressure just on that one side and not have it as flat on there, and then it should straighten out. Honestly, it should kind of straighten itself out no matter what, but it's obviously good to just watch and make sure this is going in straight and true, which can be hard to see with your eyes too though, because these control arms are obviously they're not, you know, a complete straight, they're a little curved. So but here we go. It's not pressed in all the way. I just want to give you guys a shot of what it looked like. I kind of took it back out and just wanted to make sure that it was going in straight and true. So I was able to press it in far enough where I could take it out and take a look and make sure it was looking like it was going in well, like it should. So then we just throw it back on the press and press it in all the way. When you are using a press, usually they do have a gauge where you can see how much pressure you're putting down, and also honestly just through the feel of as you're kind of pumping down the press, you can usually kind of tell once it gets harder and it hits a certain point that it's pretty much kind of bottomed out. So of course you don't want to press it too hard because that could break stuff if you went too much. My general rule here, and maybe I'm wrong, but there's a snap ring that you're going to have to put back in place. So if you press it far enough and that snap ring goes in place, you should be fine. If you can't get that snap ring in place, that means you might not have pressed it down as far as you should have. But there we go. We got everything pressed in place. So now, of course, we're going back in time a little bit here. Before I had this front subframe all the way bolted up. But we're going to put this control arm in place. As I mentioned again, with these bushings, you can try to bend them a little bit, or I should say adjust the angle of them. And then also what helped for me was having this as far forward as I just did. I pushed it inward. Pushing the control arm inward, having it inward helped to slide it in a little bit. So I guess from where I'm standing in frame, I had to push it away from me. But towards the center of the car, it seems to want to slide in that way, and then you pull it back out a little bit to line it up. That's what worked better for me to get this control arm back in place. But of course, we're just going to line it up and tighten things up. But don't forget, I honestly did almost forget. I know I show things in maybe a little bit of weird order here, but as I mentioned, the snap ring. You got to put that snap ring back in place. Luckily, you can do this anytime for the most part until you get that ball joint actually put back into that knuckle. But we're going to use a snap ring here. Again, this one with the 90-degree bend in the snap ring pliers seemed to help a lot. I also had to put this boot back in place. I guess I didn't film that either, but the yellow protective boot, I put that back in place as well. Again, if you want a different how-to video on it, actually I'll link to that video description down below if you're working on your own ball joints and want to see that full one in detail. So we're going to make sure that snap ring is flat and all the way in place, and then we should be good to go. One thing you're going to notice with ball joints too, especially these newer ones, they're not as loose. They're not as easy to move around when you go to reinstall them. So if you do have a rubber hammer or rubber mallet, that comes in handy, as you can see I'm going to use here, just because you just kind of can't, I'm not strong enough anyway, always to just push this around and move it around, but sometimes just hitting it with a rubber hammer moves it around a little bit, and you kind of need to line this up right to be able to put it in to the lower part of that front knuckle, or front spindle, if you will. So make sure you get that lined up. It should be kind of going straight in when you slide it up in place. You can utilize a hammer again if you need to once it's started to just get it up in place. And then I was lucky, I guess. I already had lined up the notch. There is the notch that should be facing towards the inside of the car. If you need to spin that notch, you can utilize a vice grip and put a vice grip on it to turn it. And if you're saying, well, what notch? What do I care about a notch? Well, if you're going to put this lower bolt in, if you're putting this bolt in to hold your ball joint in and it doesn't go through, don't use it. Take a hammer to it and pound it through, because you're just messing things up. You got to make sure that that notch is facing the right way where it gives room for that bolt to go through. So don't be surprised if you're doing this where you're trying to get that bolt through and it doesn't go through. In this case, I did utilize a hammer to just make sure it was up all the way, and then the bolt slid through, so that was good. But if it might not go on your first time, like I said, so you might have to pull that ball joint back out, put a vice grip on that lower ball joint itself, and then spin it so that notch is lined up the right way. So there you have it, guys. That's everything I got done recently working on the new red EVO shell. As always, I appreciate everybody watching. I appreciate all the comments, people helping me out actually to get this thing done. So thanks so much for watching. If I did anything wrong, go ahead again, let me know in the comments too. Or let me know if there was a better way I could have did something. But as always, this is Paul from Boosted Films saying thanks so much for watching. I just want to say that domestic violence is never okay. If you or someone you know is experiencing issues with a partner and doesn't feel safe, please visit the website thehotline.org or call 1-800-799-SAFE.